Today, on average, 2 ships are lost at sea per week. The seafloor is therefore littered with thousands of shipwrecks. Today, we're going to find out why the ocean has a graveyard of ships. First, let's explore the history of seafaring. With the way that our planet has formed, humans soon had to find a way to cross bodies of water if they wanted to continue to explore and expand into new regions. As we've learned to use the sea and rivers to our advantage, seafaring evolved from basic coastal navigation at the beginning to the exploration of vast oceans, which transformed human history, culture, and economic opportunities. The ability to take to the seas has shaped civilizations, led to the discovery of new lands, and fueled the growth of global trade networks, enabling the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies across the entire world. The earliest evidence of seafaring dates back to around 9000 BCE, when humans were believed to have used rafts or dugout canoes to travel short distances across rivers, lakes, and coastal areas. Ancient people in regions like Mesopotamia, in Egypt, and the Indus Valley used natural waterways for transportation, fishing, and trade. The ancient Egyptians, for example, were advanced boat builders who used the Nile as a major transportation route and would build boats of reeds that could carry goods and people, and this paved the way for a creation of more complex and capable ships. One of the first major advances then came by the Polynesians, who developed techniques for long-distance ocean navigation as early as 2000 BCE. Using large, double-hulled canoes and navigating by the stars, winds, and ocean swells, they embarked on huge voyages across the Pacific, and they settled on islands as far apart as Hawaii, Easter Island, and even New Zealand. Their skills made it possible for them to cover vast distances of open water with no modern navigational tools, and instead they relied on the deep knowledge of natural signs and many centuries of experience that was passed on generation to generation by word of mouth. In the Mediterranean, the ancient Phoenicians emerged as one of the leading maritime civilizations around 1200 BCE. They learned advanced shipbuilding techniques and built sturdy vessels that were able to endure the open sea. With this capability, they were able to establish extensive trade networks across the Mediterranean and beyond, connecting the people of North Africa, Southern Europe, and the Near East. They would also then be able to found colonies like Carthage and would be an important part in the development of a number of civilizations, thanks to the newfound ability to share ideas, technologies, and cultures throughout the ancient world. Things would then take a major leap forward during the Age of Exploration, which began in the late 15th century. Advances in ship design, navigational techniques, and map-making made it possible for European explorers to explore far beyond familiar waters. Christopher Columbus's 1492 voyage to the Americas and Vasco da Gama's journey around the southern tip of Africa to reach India in 1498 opened up new trade routes and completely changed the course of global history. The development of tools like the compass and the astrolabe were what really changed navigation during this era, as they allowed sailors to know their direction and latitude with far greater accuracy. Ships like the caravel and galleon became the workhorses of European exploration and commerce, and would carry explorers, soldiers, settlers, and goods across the world. It was because of our ability to sail the seas that global empires would be created, with vast trade routes like the Silk Road by sea. In the 19th and 20th centuries, the Industrial Revolution changed sailing once again, with the introduction of steam-powered ships that replaced sailing vessels and made sea travel much faster, more reliable, and less dependent on wind. Today, even though alternatives have reduced the reliance on ships to transport passengers, more than 80% of the world's trade in goods is done by sea, with massive container ships traveling from port to port. With such a rich history of taking to the oceans, you can only imagine how many voyages have been undertaken. But with changeable weather conditions and dangers hidden beneath the waves, it hasn't always been as easy to cross the oceans as it is today. Let's learn about the most treacherous routes. Even with well-built ships and methods of navigation, there's always been an inherent danger in taking to the seas, and historically at least, every trip was seen as a potential risk. In the 18th and 19th centuries, for example, 1 in every 7 ships that left port would be lost without a trace. With the risk of severe weather, strong currents, piracy, and submerged obstacles, there are some routes in particular that have become notorious over the centuries and have caused more than their fair share of shipwrecks. The Cape of Good Hope. One of the most famous and dangerous routes of all is around the Cape of Good Hope, which is at the southern tip of Africa. This area is known for its violent weather systems and massive waves, particularly where the Atlantic and Indian Oceans meet. Sailors who navigate the Cape face the notorious currents, which can create rogue waves as high as 100 feet or 30 meters, and throughout history, many ships, including large vessels, have been lost in this region. Originally, it was known as the Cape of Storms by early explorers due to the difficulty of going around it, and its name was only changed later on to the Cape of Good Hope in an effort to encourage more people to be willing to sail around it to take advantage of new trade routes. The Drake Passage, which is between the southern tip of South America and Antarctica, is one of the most dangerous bodies of water on the planet. It's a narrow stretch of ocean, but one that's notorious for its unpredictable and violent weather, with strong westerly winds and massive waves that challenge even the most experienced crews. The reason for this is that there aren't any major land masses to help break up the intense wind and current, and this leads to the formation of frequent storms and rough seas. Ships traveling between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans by this route therefore deal with these extreme conditions, making the Drake Passage a treacherous but crucial pathway for vessels heading towards Antarctica or transoceanic voyages. The Strait of Malacca, which is between the Malay Peninsula and the Indonesian island of Sumatra, is one of the busiest and most strategically important shipping routes in the world. It is also one of the most dangerous due to the risk of piracy. With as much as 25% of the world's traded goods passing through this narrow waterway, the Malacca Strait has become a hotspot for pirate attacks, despite efforts to patrol the area. Ships navigating this route are at constant risk of hijacking, robbery, or violence, especially near its narrowest points. Along with this, it's also dangerous because of its heavy traffic and shallow waters, where there are 34 shipwrecks, some dating back to the 1880s, which aren't always visible and are a major collision hazard. Despite there being a relatively short and narrow passage between the southern coast of England and northern France, the English Channel is seen as one of the most dangerous and congested shipping lanes in the world. The channel's high volume of traffic, combined with strong currents, rapidly changing weather, and shifting sandbanks, makes it difficult to navigate. Countless vessels have been lost in it over the years, including armadas of warships. And still, today, navigation protocols are needed to avoid accidents, with a mixture of ferries, cargo vessels, fishing trawlers, and smaller leisure and transport craft that regularly use it. Found between Russia and Alaska, the Bering Sea has become notorious for its harsh and unpredictable conditions, especially during winter months. This region experiences extremely cold temperatures, ice formation, and powerful storms, which creates major risks for shipping vessels. The presence of icebergs and sea ice further complicates things, making this route really dangerous for the fishing boats and cargo ships that operate it. The ominously named Graveyard of the Atlantic is a stretch of ocean off the coast of North Carolina, particularly around the waters near the Outer Banks. This area has earned its name, though, because of the high number of shipwrecks that have occurred there over the centuries, and with an estimated 2,000 vessels lost in all. The dangerous conditions are caused by the confluence of the warm Gulf Stream and the cold Labrador Current, which creates unpredictable weather and moving sandbars. These natural hazards, along with the dense fog that's common here, have historically made navigation extremely tricky. The area also played a role in war, with German U-boats targeting Allied vessels during World War II, adding to the number of shipwrecks here. Let's talk about how many wrecks there are. With all these challenges and obstacles, it's only been in modern times with advanced technology that the idea of a ship sinking or being lost is seen as unusual. The ocean floor is simply littered with an estimated 3 million shipwrecks from across the centuries, and they're scattered across the globe, each telling a story of human aspiration and sometimes mystery. These wrecks are, though, important archaeological relics from various times in history, ranging from ancient maritime trade routes to modern-day naval battles. From the Mediterranean to the icy waters of the North Atlantic, they can be found in virtually every part of the world. In the Mediterranean, for example, some of the oldest known shipwrecks have been discovered, many dating back to the ancient world. Wrecks from the Phoenician, Roman, and Greek times lie along historic trading routes and would have carried valuable cargo like pottery, wine, and olive oil, which was crucial to trade at the time. The Atlantic Ocean is home to some of the most famous wrecks too, including ships lost during wartime and voyages of exploration. The Titanic is there, for example, and so are thousands of wrecks from both world wars, including naval vessels, merchant ships, and submarines, many of which were sunk by torpedoes or mines. The waters around the British Isles are particularly dense with wrecks from history and World War II, as both German U-boats and Allied forces targeted what has, for centuries, been a major maritime route. The Pacific Ocean also holds a huge number of wrecks, many from the days of European exploration in the 16th and 17th centuries. The Pacific's notorious typhoons and treacherous reefs were a constant threat to voyages, and of course, it too is also home to wrecks from more recent history, particularly from the Second World War. Other areas with a large number of shipwrecks include the Great Lakes in North America, where there are sudden and severe storms, and the Indian Ocean and Red Sea, which have been important maritime trade routes for thousands of years. In recent years, though, developments in underwater technology have led to the discovery of many new wrecks, and sonar, remotely operated vehicles, and deep-sea submersibles have allowed archaeologists and explorers to locate and study wrecks at greater depths than ever before. Not every wreck is seen as important to discover and retrieve, though, particularly as this is a costly endeavor, but there are some that have been a focal point for salvage hunters and historians because of the treasures they hold or the historical significance that they had. Let's look at some of the most valuable wrecks. The San Jose at $17 billion. Well, this one's regarded as the most valuable shipwreck of all. The San Jose. It was a Spanish galleon that was part of the Spanish South Sea Fleet, which regularly sailed from Spanish colonies in South America to Spain. The ship's mission was to carry vast riches that had been gathered from Spanish-controlled territories in the Americas, particularly from the Potosi mines in present-day Bolivia. These fleets were crucial to the Spanish economy as they brought back huge amounts of gold and silver, which helped finance the Spanish Empire's military campaigns. By the time of its final voyage in 1708, the San Jose was loaded with treasure that today is estimated to be worth somewhere between $17 to $20 billion. The British, who were at war with Spain during this period, were well aware of the treasure that these galleons carried, and the San Jose became a prime target. On June 8, 1708, the ship was attacked by British Commodore Charles Wager's squadron near Cartagena. In a fierce battle, the San Jose was hit and it exploded, probably after a cannonball hit its gunpowder stores. The ship quickly sank, taking its treasure to the bottom of the Caribbean Sea, where it remained hidden for centuries, buried beneath layers of sand and debris. For over 300 years, treasure hunters, historians, and governments have been obsessed with the mystery of the final resting place of this legendary treasure ship. But in 2015, the Colombian government announced that it had discovered its wreck near Cartagena, although the exact coordinates were kept a secret. Efforts are now underway to retrieve as much as possible, but this isn't as easy as it would seem, because as is common with the salvage of vessels, there's a legal dispute surrounding the rightful ownership of the treasure, with Spain, Colombia, and various other groups laying claim to it. The Colombian government has argued that the treasure is part of its cultural heritage. The Bolivian authorities want it back after it was taken from their land, and Spain argues it's theirs because the ship was part of their fleet. The Flor de la Mar, $2.6 billion. Well, the Flor de la Mar, which translates to mean the flower of the sea, was a Portuguese carrack that sailed the seas during the early 16th century. It was launched in 1502. It was one of the largest vessels of its time, and it was designed to carry large amounts of cargo. It was initially commissioned to support Portugal's expansion into the Indian Ocean, where the Portuguese crown wanted to take control of the lucrative spice trade. Under the command of the famous explorer Vasco da Gama, it made its maiden voyage to India, joining other Portuguese ships and establishing a foothold in Asia. The carrack was involved in a number of important missions, transporting spices, goods, and Portuguese officials between Europe and the East. It became a symbol of Portugal's dominance in the Indian Ocean, seen as an intimidating force on the high seas. In 1511, under the command of Alfonso de Albuquerque, the Flor de la Mar was involved in one of the most important military campaigns of the time, the conquest of the wealthy city of Malacca, which is in modern-day Malaysia. The Portuguese wanted to take control of Malacca's port, which was a major hub for the spice trade between the East and the West. After a successful siege, the Flor de la Mar was loaded with treasure, including gold, jewels, and other valuable artifacts that were taken from Malacca as the spoils of war. On its return voyage, though, the Flor de la Mar encountered a violent storm off the coast of Sumatra near the Strait of Malacca. the ship broke apart on a reef and sank with its treasure, which was lost and buried somewhere. Thought to now be worth between $2 to $3 billion, treasure hunters have been looking for it for centuries, but so far, its location still remains a mystery. The Royal Merchant, $1.5 billion. The Royal Merchant was an English merchant ship that was built in the early 1600s, and it became known as the El Dorado of the seas. It was a large, sturdy vessel that was used for trading voyages between England and various European and New World ports, and it was captained by John Limbury, who was an experienced sailor who had taken the ship on a number of successful trading expeditions. The Royal Merchant and its sister ship, the Dover Merchant, were often used to trade goods like textiles, spices, and other commodities, and it provided a vital link between Europe's economies and the distant colonial markets. In 1640, the Royal Merchant had left on a particularly profitable mission to Spain, where it was involved in carrying treasure to pay Spanish troops that were stationed in Flanders. This gold and silver had been acquired from Spain's American colonies and was meant to support Spain's military forces during the 30 Years' War. After completing its mission, the ship was also hired to transport more treasure back to England. However, after leaving the Spanish port of Cadiz in August of 1641, the ship encountered severe mechanical difficulties. While sailing in the waters near Cornwall off the southwest coast of England, the ship's pumps failed and the ship began to take on water. Despite desperate efforts by the crew to save the vessel, it became clear that the ship was sinking. On September 23, 1641, the Royal Merchant went down, taking with it an estimated 100,000 pounds of gold, 400 bars of Mexican silver, and tens of thousands of valuable coins and jewels. The value of this treasure in today's terms has been estimated to be around $1.5 billion, making it one of the richest treasure ships ever lost. Amazingly, even though it was fairly close to shore when it sank, and even with the use of modern, advanced technology over countless expeditions, the exact location of this vessel has yet to be determined. Las Cinco Llagas, $1 billion. Las Cinco Llagas, which means the 5 wounds in Spanish, was one of the largest Portuguese carracks of the 16th century. The ship's name was a reference to the 5 holy wounds of Christ, which was a symbol of devotion in Catholic Portugal and became a hugely important part of the country's fleet. During the late 15th and 16th centuries, the Portuguese Empire was a major maritime force, expanding its influence across the world through exploration, trade, and colonization. Their fleet routinely sailed between Europe and its colonies in India, carrying spices, precious gems, silk, and other valuable goods back to Europe. These voyages were dangerous, though, because of the long distances, treacherous waters, and the constant threat of pirates or enemy ships. Las Cinco Llagas was a leading part of this fleet, and its main role was to transport spices between India and Portugal. In 1594, she was returning from Cochin, India, which was meant to be a celebrated voyage back to Lisbon. The ship was heavily loaded with riches that had been collected from Portuguese colonies in Asia. It carries tons of spices, gemstones, pearls, gold, and silver, and it was also transporting some high-profile Portuguese noblemen and passengers. As the ship approached the Azores, which was an important refueling and supply point on the way back to Europe, it encountered a fleet of English privateers led by Sir John Burroughs. The English, who were battling with Spain and its ally Portugal during this time, were looking to capture Portuguese ships on their return from the Indies because of the cargo they held. So, on August 26, 1594, Las Cinco Llagas was attacked near the island of Fayal. A battle ensued, with Las Cinco Llagas defending itself well at first. The ship's huge size and its heavily armed crew were able to fend off the attackers. However, after hours of combat, the ship was severely damaged and its gunpowder magazine exploded. The blast ripped through the hull, sinking the ship and sending the treasure to the bottom of the sea. Thought to be worth as much as $1 billion, the treasure that sank with her remains one of the most highly valued fortunes lost to history. And despite a number of attempts, efforts to find its wreck have so far been unsuccessful. The 1715 Treasure Fleet. Well, this was one of the most consequential maritime incidents in history, as rather than involving a wreck of one vessel, it saw an entire fleet being lost. It was part of Spain's annual treasure convoy system, known as the Spanish Treasure Fleet, which was central to the Spanish Empire's ability to retain its wealth during the Age of Exploration. Each year, the fleet would sail from Spanish colonies in the Americas, particularly from ports in Mexico and Colombia, to bring back gold, silver, and other valuable commodities. These treasure fleets were vital to their economy as they financed the empire's political and military pursuits. The 1715 treasure fleet was made up of 11 ships, including galleons and merchant vessels, each of which was loaded with an enormous amount of treasure. At the time, Spain had a near monopoly on those resources, and the fleet was a direct pipeline to the Spanish crown's wealth. The voyage started well, but things took a turn for the worse when the fleet encountered a powerful hurricane off the eastern coast of Florida. This hurricane, which struck on July 30th and into July 31st, 1715, battered the ships, and one by one they were driven onto reefs or capsized in the storm. By the time the winds had calmed, all 11 of the fleet's ships had been lost, and they were scattered along Florida's Treasure Coast, which gets its name from this incident. A 12th ship, a French frigate, had also been sailing with the fleet, but its captain wasn't familiar with the Floridian coastline and chose to stay further out to sea. It completely avoided the storm and returned safely to Europe, showing that the loss of the fleet could have been avoided. The wreckage of the treasure fleet was largely forgotten until the 20th century, when modern treasure hunters began searching for the long-lost riches. In 1961, treasure hunter Mel Fisher and his team discovered the wrecks of several of the ships and were able to retrieve significant amounts of gold and silver. Today, it's thought that many billions of dollars worth of treasure still lies underwater, waiting to be found, but without any records from the ships, we simply don't know how much there is. Now let's talk about some of the most historically important wrecks. The Santa Maria. Well, as every school child knows, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. But that doesn't mean all the ships involved in this quest were able to return home again. The Santa Maria is, of course, one of the most famous ships in history, as Columbus's flagship during this first voyage across the Atlantic, along with the Nina and the Pinta, and it was part of a fleet of 3 ships that set sail from Spain under the commission of Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. The Santa Maria was a carrack, which is a type of ship used mainly for exploration and the transportation of cargo during the late 15th century. It was the largest of Columbus's 3 ships, although by modern standards it was relatively small, measuring about 62 feet or 19 meters long and weighing around 100 tons. Unlike the faster, more maneuverable caravels like the Nina and the Pinta, the Santa Maria was slower and less suited for long-distance exploration, but its size allowed it to carry more provisions and a larger crew. When Columbus set sail from Spain on August 3, 1492, his goal was to find a westward route to the riches of Asia, and like most Europeans at the time, he believed that the world was much smaller than it is, and that sailing west across the Atlantic would lead him to Asia more quickly than the overland routes. Using the Santa Maria as his command center during the voyage, it was a challenging 2-month journey, and they finally made landfall on October 12, 1492, on an island in the present-day Bahamas, which Columbus named San Salvador. Although he believed he had reached islands off the coast of Asia, he had in fact stumbled upon the Americas, forever changing world history. Columbus was celebrated on his return to Spain, but he was without the Santa Maria. On Christmas Eve of 1492, while sailing near present-day Haiti, the ship ran aground on a reef and was wrecked beyond repair. Today, one of the original anchors is on display at a museum in Haiti, but as far as the location of the wreck site and what remains of the vessel, no one knows for sure. And it's possible the most significant one, from a historically important perspective, it might still be found. How about the Antikythera shipwreck? Discovered in 1900 off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera, this shipwreck has been heralded as one of the most important underwater archaeological discoveries of all time, as it's given a fascinating look into the ancient maritime trade and the technology of the ancient world. The ship is a Roman vessel that dates from the 1st century BCE, and it was carrying a cargo of luxury goods from the eastern Mediterranean. It's believed to have been involved in the trade routes that connected the eastern parts of the Roman Empire, which included Greece, Asia Minor, and Egypt, with Rome at the heart of the empire. The ship met its fate, though, near the island of Antikythera, which is between Crete and the mainland Greece, possibly due to a storm or navigational error that caused it to crash against the island's rocky coastline. The wreck remained hidden for nearly 2,000 years until it was accidentally discovered by Greek sponge divers in 1900. These divers were the first to recover artifacts from the site, which lay more than 160 feet or 50 meters below the surface. Well, to begin with, they found bronze and marble statues, amphorae, jewelry, and other luxury items, and the Greek government soon organized a formal excavation, which continued until 1901, and uncovered an incredible range of artifacts, including works of art, coins, and everyday items. But probably the most important find from the wreck, though, was the so-called Antikythera mechanism, which is a complex bronze device that was discovered in a corroded, fragmented state and appeared to be a simple lump of bronze in the beginning. Further studies, however, would go on to reveal its true nature as a highly sophisticated gear-driven machine that was designed to calculate astronomical positions and to predict celestial events such as eclipses. This mechanism is seen as the first known analog computer and demonstrates the advanced knowledge of the ancient Greeks. It's a great example of how a ship that met an unfortunate end so long ago is now a valued archaeological relic. And it's helped reveal more about ancient civilization, too. It's why so much investment and effort is put into researching shipwrecks at the bottom of the ocean, because who knows what we'll find next. How about Queen Anne's Revenge? Well, the Queen Anne's Revenge was the flagship of the notorious pirate Edward Teach, who was better known as Blackbeard and was one of the most feared and legendary pirates of the golden age of piracy. The ship played a critical role in Blackbeard's short career as a pirate, as he terrorized the Caribbean and the eastern seaboard of the American colonies in the early 18th century. It was originally known as La Concorde, and it was a French frigate that was built in 1710 and would go on to mainly be used in the Atlantic slave trade. After renaming it under Blackbeard's command, Queen Anne's Revenge became one of the most formidable pirate ships of its time. Now armed with 40 cannons and had a large crew, it was capable of overpowering almost any vessel it came across. He used it to blockade ports, raid merchant ships, and strike fear into the hearts of sailors and colonial authorities. One of his most famous plans took place in May of 1718 when he used Queen Anne's Revenge to blockade the port of Charleston, South Carolina, and used this to capture several more ships and hostages, demanding a ransom of medical supplies. The Queen Anne's Revenge reign of terror was short-lived, though, and in June of 1718, just months after the Charleston blockade, Blackbeard ran the ship aground on a sandbar near Beaufort Inlet off the coast of North Carolina. Some historians believe that this was a deliberate act by Blackbeard to downsize his fleet and distribute the loot among a smaller, more loyal crew, while others think it was a rare navigational mistake on his part. Either way, the wreck remained lost for centuries. But in 1996, marine archaeologists actually discovered the wreck of the Queen Anne's Revenge, and excavations have unearthed a trove of artifacts, including cannons, navigational instruments, personal belongings, and even medical supplies, all of which have given great insight in what pirate life, naval warfare, and early 18th century maritime culture was really like. The Mary Rose. She was one of the most famous warships of the Tudor Navy, serving as a central part of England's maritime defense under King Henry VIII. Launched in 1511, it was the flagship of his navy, built in Portsmouth, weighed about 500 tons, and it had a complement of around 60 guns, which was a huge amount for a warship at the time. Its career would, though, come to an end on July 19, 1545, during the Battle of the Solent. It was part of a fleet defending England from a French invasion force that had sailed across the Channel. As the Mary Rose prepared to engage the French galleys, it suddenly began to heel over and sink within sight of Henry VIII, who was watching from Southsea Castle. The exact cause of the sinking is still debated by historians, with theories ranging from human error and poor seamanship to a strong gust of wind or a fatal hit from French artillery. The Mary Rose lay on the seabed for over 400 years before being rediscovered in 1971, and because of its historic importance, this led to one of the most ambitious maritime archaeological projects that's ever been undertaken, which saw the wreck being raised from the Solent in 1982. The preservation of the Mary Rose and the vast number of artifacts found aboard, including weapons, tools, clothing, and personal items, have added so much depth to our understanding of Tudor life and medieval naval warfare. And today, the Mary Rose and its artifacts are housed in the Mary Rose Museum in Portsmouth, where they're on public display. The Titanic. Well, probably the most famous shipwreck of all time. The RMS Titanic was the largest and most advanced ocean liner of its time. Work on it began in 1909 at the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Ireland, and it was designed to be part of White Star Line's attempt to take control of the transatlantic passenger market and eliminate rival companies like the Cunard Line. The Titanic, along with her sister ships, the Olympic and the Britannic, was meant to offer unmatched luxury for wealthy passengers, while also transporting large numbers of immigrants who were traveling to North America. The ship was 882 feet or 269 meters long, weighed over 46,000 tons, and could carry more than 2,200 people. To glorious fanfare, the Titanic set out on its maiden voyage from Southampton in England on April 10, 1912, bound for New York City. It made stops in Cherbourg, France, and Queenstown, Ireland before heading into the open Atlantic, with some of the wealthiest and most influential people of the era on board. Unfortunately, though, the ship was traveling through an area known for icebergs when, at 11:40 p.m. on April 14, 1912, it struck an iceberg on its starboard side. The collision caused a series of punctures along the hull, which flooded several compartments. Despite its state-of-the-art design and the claims of it being unsinkable, the Titanic wasn't equipped to handle such extensive damage. As water flooded the lower decks, it became clear that the ship would sink, and by 2:20 a.m. on April 15th, the Titanic had broken apart and sunk beneath the waves. Despite knowing where it had gone down, it wasn't until 1985 that the wreck was discovered, lying at a depth of over 12,000 feet, or almost 3,700 meters. Haunting images were shared around the world of the state that it was in, and because of the pressures and depths involved, it'll never be possible to retrieve it. Instead, researchers have been able to send remotely operated vehicles down there to explore it and image it. And at its current state of decay, it's unlikely it'll still be there in a decade or two, which is, unfortunately, what will have happened to most shipwrecks before they're even discovered. Alright, let's talk about some modern wrecks. USS Samuel B. Roberts. The USS Samuel B. Roberts, DE-413, was a John C. Butler-class destroyer escort of the United States Navy. It was commissioned in 1944, and it was originally designed for anti-submarine and escort duties, but it found itself confronting an overwhelmingly superior Japanese force on October 25, 1944, that led to it becoming known as the destroyer escort that fought like a battleship. During the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle of World War II, the USS Samuel B. Roberts was part of a task unit 7743, also known as Taffy 3, which was a small group of escort carriers, destroyers, and destroyer escorts that were tasked with providing air cover for the U.S. invasion of the Philippines. On October 25th, Taffy 3 came face-to-face with Admiral Takeo Kurita's Japanese Central Force, which included the battleship Yamato, the largest and most powerful battleship ever built, along with several cruisers and destroyers. Despite the overwhelming odds, the USS Samuel B. Roberts, alongside other ships from Taffy 3, engaged the Japanese fleet. Roberts' captain, Lieutenant Commander Robert W. Copeland, ordered a bold charge against much larger enemy warships, which saw the Roberts firing its 5-inch guns and launching torpedoes at enemy heavy cruisers, scoring hits and drawing fire away from the vulnerable American escort carriers. The destroyer escort endured continual fire, but kept on fighting until it was critically damaged by enemy shells. Even with this damage, the Samuel B. Roberts still helped to disrupt the Japanese attack and helped towards what would be a surprising American victory. For its extraordinary actions during the battle, the USS Samuel B. Roberts and its crew were awarded a Presidential Unit Citation in recognition of their exceptional heroism. The wreck of the ship, though, remained lost for decades until June of 2022, when it was finally discovered at an extraordinary depth of over 22,000 feet, or almost 6,900 meters. Amazingly, the wreck hit the seabed in one piece, but images have shown that it has since begun to break up under the enormous pressures that it's been subjected to so far beneath the surface. The SS Edmund Fitzgerald. The SS Edmund Fitzgerald was a massive American freighter that, launched in 1958, was named after the president of Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company, which owned the vessel. At 729 feet or 222 meters long, it was the largest ship on the Great Lakes when it was built. It was designed primarily to transport iron ore from mines near Duluth, Minnesota to ironworks in Detroit and other Great Lake ports, and it soon became known for its speed and size, with the ability to carry over 25,000 tons of cargo. On November 9th, the Fitzgerald departed from Superior, Wisconsin, with a cargo of taconite pellets, which were destined for a steel mill near Detroit. Shortly after it left, it encountered a severe storm with near hurricane-force winds, towering waves, and heavy snow. As the storm intensified on November 10th, the Fitzgerald, along with the nearby freighter Arthur M. Anderson, faced worsening conditions. Captain Ernest McSorley reported the damage to Fitzgerald, including the loss of radar and that water was flooding the ship. Despite these issues, McSorley remained calm, famously radioing, "We're holding our own." By 7:10 p.m., however, the ship suddenly disappeared from the radar screens, and it sank without a trace. The wreck of the vessel was found later in that month in two pieces at a depth of over 500 feet or 150 meters in Lake Superior. Its sinking had a major impact on Great Lakes shipping regulations, leading to stricter safety measures, including improved weather forecasting and the mandatory use of depth finders to hopefully avoid an incident like it ever happening again. How about we talk about the most dangerous shipwreck, the SS Richard Montgomery. It's easy to look at shipwrecks as historical or lost objects, but they can pose a real and present danger long after they've sunk beneath the waves. There are countless stories of ships full of fuel or toxic materials that have leaked out into the ocean, but arguably the most dangerous of all is the SS Richard Montgomery. It was an American Liberty ship that was built in 1943 at the St. Johns River Shipbuilding Company in Jacksonville, Florida, as part of the United States' drive to mass-produce merchant ships. Vessels like these were essential to the Allied logistics during the war and were designed to carry a wide variety of cargo. The SS Richard Montgomery's last voyage took place in August of 1944, when loaded with an estimated 7,000 tons of munitions, including bombs and various explosives, it sailed from the United States to Britain as part of a convoy to support the final stages of the war. On August 20, 1944, the vessel was anchored off the Thames estuary near the town of Sheerness on the Isle of Sheppey in Kent. During the anchoring process, the ship grounded on a sandbank in the shallow waters of the Medway, and despite attempts to free it, things worsened and it began to break apart as the tide shifted. The crew was evacuated safely, but the munitions remained on board, and the ship eventually split in two. The forward section of the vessel sank quickly, while the midsection remained partially above water. To this day, more than 1,400 tons of unexploded munitions remains inside the deteriorating wreck, including some bombs weighing up to 2,000 pounds. The exact stability of these munitions is uncertain, but they represent a significant potential threat to nearby areas, including major shipping routes, oil refineries, and urban centers like London. If the explosives were to detonate, it could cause a large-scale explosion with catastrophic consequences. From rough waters to unpredictable weather, shallows beneath the surface, war, and actions of pirates, there's always been a lot to contend with for those brave enough to want to explore or even develop new trade routes. Luckily, the risk of being lost at sea is now greatly reduced. But in the face of these dangers, it's the human need to push the limits that explain why the ocean has a graveyard of ships. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time. Thank you to our channel members.